Yeah, G3.
That's
what we was in G3.
Philadelphia
It was the
Orchestra.
third one in line. So,
Good afternoon.
yeah,
Welcome to the March meeting of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. And I just want to say, every time I hear classical music like that, it amazes me that one person can have all that stuff running through their head and commit it to paper to be played. I always enjoy that. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Stair, and I'm president of this organization. I'd like to welcome all of you here today. Is anybody here for the first time? Never been with us before? All right, we'll start here. We'd like to have your name, where you're from, and what you're researching and what you're interested in. So,
Amy Squire, my husband George Squire, and I'm the aunt of Richard Konkel, and my mother started researching decades ago genealogy when the only information we got was from church records and so on. So our family is very interested.
okay,
Yes.
great. So Richard brought us in cheering section. Okay, in the back, sir.
I'm James Barker. My father's family has all been in Virginia since the 16, 17, and 1800s. My father was born in Virginia. I was born in DC, and I'm interested in American ancestry. I worked at the DAR library in Washington, DC, assisting people for 20 years.
Good.
Uh,
Welcome.
I've been researching my own family for over 50 years.
Great. Thank you all for coming today. Our secretary, Richard Robinstein, is having some health issues, and Richard, if you're watching, our thoughts and prayers are with you. So in his absence, I'm going to read the minutes from the last meeting. President Jonathan Stair called the monthly meeting of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society to order at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, February 2nd, 2025. 44 members and guests were present. He welcomed the attendees and gave special recognition to longtime society member and board member Barb Rudy, who had been absent for some time with health issues. First-time attendees were invited to introduce themselves. In the absence of the recording secretary, the society dispensed with the reading of the minutes of the January meeting. Treasurer and Membership Secretary Margaret Berg presented the January 2025 financial report, showing a starting balance on December 31st, 2024 of $17,196.48, expenses totaling $388.23, and net cash balance on January 31st, 2025 of $16,808.25. The society currently has 153 members. York County History Center Vice President of Interpretation Nicole Smith provided information about upcoming programs of the History Center. President Stair then reminded the society of the organization's 50th anniversary celebration, currently scheduled for September of this year. Also, he noted that the Friends of the York County History Center will begin collecting items for its annual book blast on March the 1st. Vice President Richard Konkel gave an overview of future programs. March the 2nd will be 17th century settlement of the Swedes in Pennsylvania by himself. April 6th will be a presentation on Farview State Hospital for the Criminally Insane by Tyler Stump of the Pennsylvania State Archives. May the 4th will be a tour of the Library, Archives, and Museum of the Adams County Historical Society in Gettysburg. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And on June the 8th, Jamie Norpole of Hometown History will be speaking about the Welsh of Southern York County. He then introduced Anisi de Shields Moulton, who gave an engaging presentation about veiled chapters of the Hampton Plantation. The meeting adjourned at 3:50 p.m. What should we say? Pretended it adjourned at 3:50. Okay. Respectfully submitted, Jonathan R. Stair, President and Acting Recording Secretary. And the minutes will stand as read unless there are any corrections to it. Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask Margaret Berg to give us the treasurers and membership report.
The balance on January 31st, 2025 was $16,808.25. There were no receipts for February. Disbursements in February, Pennsylvania sales tax for publication sales was $2.61. To Becky Anstein for miscellaneous mailing, $14.61. To Myra DeShields Moulton, speaker fee, $125. And to the York County History Center for rental of the meeting room for the anniversary in September of $250, for a total of $392.22, leaving the cash balance as of February 28th, 2025, $16,416.03. The membership it remains the same at 153 members.
Thank you, Nicole.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to make some announcements before the program. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the York County History Center YouTube channel. We have a lot of things coming up, just a brief couple for you. This Tuesday is our annual Fastnacht Day. We offer free Fastnachts to the community between 10 and 12, organized by our Friends group, Friends of the York County History Center. So please stop by our lobby here. On March 6th is our Writers Roundtable program. The speaker is Norina Bensel, who will speak about writing and publishing her memoir, Glorious Sadness. And she is a survivor of a school attack in 2001. March 9th, Samantha Dorn will present this program called The Preachers, the People, and the Praise, about York County's Black churches. I believe that's a Saturday. Or it could be a Sunday. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
The 9th is a Sunday.
The 9th, Sunday? Okay, next Sunday. On March 12th, we have a Women's History program by Amanda Owen of the Justice Bell Foundation, who will show a short documentary called Finding Justice, the Untold Story of Women's Fight for the Vote. And on March 19th, our Civil War speaker for the roundtable is Dominish Miller, speaking about Daughters of Charity at Gettysburg. So for any more information about our programs, please visit yorkhistorycenter.org. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple items before Richard comes to tell us about future programs. For some reason this morning, while I was getting ready for church, I realized that we're supposed to be thinking about nominating people for officers. And I read the bylaws and it said that I was supposed to set up a nominating committee in February. Well, I'm going to suggest that the board act as a committee of the whole as a nominating committee. And I'm hoping that all of our officers will re-up. However, if you are a member and you're not an officer and you have interest in doing so, please let me or one of the officers know. Or I have this deal on the table as well. If you'd like to be president, I will step down and fill one of the other positions and you may be president of this organization. So these are the offices that we will be voting on we're supposed to have a vote in May. Treasurer, recording secretary, corresponding secretary, and director at large. Now, we also have an appointed position of Director of Public Relations. We are delighted to have somebody who has an interest in filling that position as well. So in theory, we should be presenting a slate of officers at the next meeting. We'll see how that goes after our board meeting this afternoon. You heard in the minutes about the 50th anniversary celebration has definitely now been scheduled for September the 20th. Please plan to attend. It will be free to anyone who wants to attend. However, pre-registration will be required. You'll be hearing more information about that. That'll be here in this room. We'll start at 12 o'clock, right? With a time of just socializing and refreshments, and lunch is going to be served at 1, I believe. And then we're going to have speakers, Dave Hively, June Lloyd, and Jim McClure. Is that right? The 3 speakers. So It's going to be a great time of celebration of the 50th anniversary of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society, so I hope you can all attend. Now, as you heard in the minutes, we are planning to visit the Adams County Historical Society on May the 4th, and Richard may give you a bit more information about that. The one thing I wanted to say about that is Adams County Historical Society is requiring that we pay $15 per person for that. We understand that that may be a problem for particular people. So if you want to go, but you can't afford that, just come anyways. We will cover your cost. We are going to ask people to pay, but if you can't pay, don't let that stop you from attending. The board has agreed that we will cover the cost of anyone who cannot attend. My personal opinion is that we should try to make things as easy and free for people as possible. So if you want to go there, please come along. And if you have a financial need, just let me know. We'll take care of that. Last thing I wanted to mention is the History Center's in the process, or the Friends of the History Center in the process of collecting books for their annual book blast. You can turn in books for that at the Agricultural Industrial Museum over on Princess Street, Fridays and Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I know I already have a box of books to go, and Margaret says she has a truckload, I was gonna say truckload. So they'll accept any kind of books that are in good condition. You just don't want no Reader's Digest, no magazines.
Encyclopedia.
And yeah, no encyclopedias. I don't even know if anybody knows what encyclopedia is anymore. So if you want to help out the History Center that way, and you have books to get rid of, consider doing that. Is there any other news from the group here before I have Richard come and tell us about future programs? Okay, Richard, if you want to tell us what's coming up.
Actually, the minutes covered it pretty good. So next month, which will be here the first Sunday in April, will be Tyler Stump from Pennsylvania State Archives speaking about the Farview State Hospital, which was a state hospital for the criminally insane. So I think Tyler actually lives here in York County. I think he's picked out some cases of criminally insane people who are from York County, so we can learn about some of that. The state archives has holdings. They hold all the records of the state hospitals, which of course were for mental health treatment. As said before, the May meeting will be off-site. We'll be at the Adams County Historical Society, which is a new facility. The museum there, which we can go through the museum. I think it's sort of a self-guided tour of sorts, is about the experience of the Battle of Gettysburg from the local perspective. And that museum has won some awards for that sort of thing. And then we also have a tour and some orientation towards their genealogical library and what they have there. Many of you probably remember the late Dr. Charles Gladfelder. Their library is named after him, and he was the director of that group for a long time, as well as a professor and dean at Gettysburg College, and he did a lot to build that collection up. And then our final meeting, which is June the 8th, is Jamie Norpole, who's from here, Hometown Histories, and it's about the Welsh in the Delta area, specifically a lot about the slate mining and that sort of thing. So it should be an interesting presentation. And then I think Jonathan's going to introduce me and we can get this ball rolling here.
Literally, our speaker this afternoon needs no introduction, but our speaker is going to be our Vice President, Richard Konkel, who is a local attorney. He also plays in the York Symphony. He's been president and vice president, switching each term since for about the past 20 years, 30 years. So certainly he's familiar to us. And he's going to be speaking about the Swedish settlements along the Delaware. And in leading up to that, being retired from the State Archives, I was reminded that the State Archives has one of the oldest land records of the state of Pennsylvania, which is a survey book that was done by a surveyor named Walter Wharton in the 1670s. He was surveying the lands that Richard is going to be talking about. And the volume that the State Archives has a very interesting history. It was removed from the land office centuries ago, It ended up in a pile of papers to be recycled. And it was reclaimed and sent back to the state archives back in, I think, the 1940s. It was published under the title Walter Wharton Survey Book, and the editor of that was Albert Cook Myers. And I just want to read what he wrote about how this all transpired. He said, Albert Cook Myers reported that just in the nick of time, the register was rescued by a workman attracted by the antique handwriting before a pulping machine of a York County paper plant, to which it had been sold by a Harrisburg junk dealer, was about to devour this precious old manuscript. And that York County paper plant was P.H. Wadfelder in Spring Grove. And so we have a connection, not only through people, but through documents to what Richard's going to be talking about. And in the Centennial book that the State Archives did, there is a picture of one of the pages of that survey book, which I'll let that up there if you want to take a look at it. I have the orange tab where you can find out information about this. So, with no further ado, Richard Konkel. Thank you.
All right, let me see if I know how to operate this thing. It's been a little while. So I intended to present here this season, this year, and I didn't know what to do. And New Sweden, you just don't hear many speakers that talk about it. This gentleman, Peter Stebbins Craig, he's the primary modern researcher and writer and historian about New Sweden, and he wrote several books, in particular the 1671 census of the Swedes on the Delaware, and his biggest work, the 1693 census of the Swedes on the Delaware. He did a lot of research here in the United States and also in Sweden. And he probably knew more about this subject than anyone else. Margaret Berg and I, probably in 1999 or 2000, I'm not sure which year, it's so long ago, we heard him speak. I don't remember him being a very dynamic speaker, but I think this is when I bought this book. It was in Aberdeen. It was a conference by the Maryland Genealogical Society, and I was one of the speakers as well. And I did get to talk to him briefly then, and I think I purchased this book then. So just sort of paying some due where it belongs. And he is deceased now. He passed away in 2009. Okay, so we're talking about New Sweden. And probably most of us in our social studies history classes in middle school and high school maybe have never heard of it. Now, I'd had AP history in high school, and I do remember a little bit. It was mentioned in passing, and I'll talk about what I learned about it through that. But mostly it's sort of forgotten. So it was a colony done through the Kingdom of Sweden on the Delaware River, and it existed from 1638 to 1655. Was then taken over by the Dutch from New Amsterdam, and in 1664, then the English. And it was actually part of the colony of New York from 1664, when New Amsterdam became New York, and the town up the Hudson became Albany, because the Duke of York, it was in his possessions, he was the brother of the king, so it was called New York and Albany, those towns, and this was all part of the colony of New York. And then, of course, the king owed a debt to Admiral William Penn, who died, and his son was the Quaker William Penn, and King Charles II gave this land then to William Penn. So who are the Swedes? They are a Viking people to begin with. Now, Viking means pirate, actually, and those Viking people caused quite a lot of trouble back in the 800s, 900s, and 1000s until they sort of converted to Christianity and became a little more domesticated. But they really got around. Now, the Swedes, actually, they went towards Russia. The Rus were actually a Viking group who went down the rivers of Russia and were the ruling families that subjugated a lot of the Slavic population there and created the modern state of Russia. A lot of the ones, the Norwegians and Danes, they ended up going the other way. towards the west, and actually they even came to North America. So Iceland was a big settlement of Vikings. And then some of they tend to have blood feuds and things. I had a course on the Vikings in college, and there were all these sagas. They're very interesting to read, but they were pretty bloodthirsty. And if you killed someone's cow and they were coming after you, and it was not good. So there was a guy called Eric the Red, and he sort of was exiled to Greenland. And then his son Leif Erikson, they found even archaeological things to prove that he was sort of in Labrador in those areas, and they called it Vinland. And it was around the year 1000. It was pretty warm in the North Atlantic area. That was a warmer period of time in history. It got colder after that, so they were actually able to settle in North America at that time. Now, the Vikings, they got around. Normandy in France was a Viking settlement of Norwegians and Danes. There was a whole part of England that was called the Danelaw. And actually the name York is a Viking name. Under the Romans, York was called Iberacum. And York then was the Viking name that was given to that area. Dublin was a Viking settlement. All the islands off of Scotland were Vikings, the Hebrides and the Faroe Islands and the Shetlands, and they're just all over the place. But they got around, and they were even in Sicily, Calabria. If you go to Sicily, there were Norman kings of Sicily, and the Arabs were there too. So Sicily is a real melting pot. Oops, going the wrong way. Okay, European colonization of the Americas. So you probably heard in history class that, Columbus came in 1492, claiming the New World, although he thought he was in India. He was claiming it for Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. And then at some point, the Portuguese were also doing a lot of exploring, and they were over here as well. And the Pope said, okay, we're going to divide everything. Spain gets half and Portugal gets half. That's why you have Brazil, this large country that speaks Portuguese. Well, that sort of left out the other maritime powers in Northern Europe. So after the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 by Elizabeth I, then these other ones that were mostly Protestant nations started exploring. And so you have permanent colonies from England, Virginia in 1607, Plymouth, 1620, Massachusetts Bay, 1630, Maryland, 1634. Then you have the Netherlands also, which was they were a maritime nation. New Amsterdam in 1625. They actually had colonies down in the Delaware as well, but not very many people. And then, of course, New Sweden in 1638, Catholic France, Acadia, which is Nova Scotia, 1605, and Quebec in 1608. This is just a map of Europe showing where those nations, so most of those nations are along the Atlantic there. Portugal, Spain, France, England, and then I think I have a, yes. And there's Sweden, way up here. So there's this is an older map from 1560. So there's England, there's France, and of course Spain and Portugal. This is a map of Sweden from 1658. And that's a little right after the Swedes lost New Sweden. But, oops, here we go. Sweden included all of Finland. Also, they had acquired most of the Baltic states. And they were acquired, the Danes had a lot of the land here that sort of bordered on Denmark, but then the Swedes got it, and looks like the Swedes got Trondheim, different interior places. So something interesting about New Sweden is the settlers are from all over Sweden and Finland. Quite a few of them were actually from Finland. You can't really tell by their names. Now, we talked about the Swedes were Viking ancestry. The Finns are something totally different. Genetically now, they probably think they're some of the first people that were there after the last ice age, sort of like the Basque people and the Welsh, sort of the Irish to a certain extent. There were people that were there for a very, very long time. Their language is another matter. Their language is not an Indo-European language at all. It's closest related to the Magyar language, which is Hungarian, and Turkish. So the language sort of points to Central Asia somewhere. And there's probably some ancestry there as well. They're sort of saying they think the ancestry is basically maybe up in this area here, which is now in Russia. The Karelia was all part of Finland. But you had things going on with the Swedes once they got Finland. They took a lot of Swedish settlers, they called them forest Finns. And they had a agricultural method where they would burn off the land and then farm it. And so there were sections of Sweden in here, central Sweden, that were pretty much unpopulated. And the kings of Sweden moved a lot of Finns over into that area. So the population is a lot more mixed than you would think. One of the people I'm going to talk about is Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. He was from Gothenburg or Göteborg down here. His wife was from Vasa, which is in Finland. So she may have been partly or maybe completely of Finnish ancestry. So what were the political things that were sort of causing this? Sweden sort of became or fancied itself a great European power in the early 1600s. And one of their kings was Gustavus Adolphus. He only had one daughter, but he fought a lot in the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side. And he even fancied himself that he should become the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, the 30 Years' War was fought from 1618 to 1648. And so he took his army and had it in Germany until his death in 1632. Now, whether you were Protestant or Catholic in Germany, if the Swedish army was coming through, that was not a good thing for your people. You wanted to get out of the way because they probably eat all your livestock and take all your grain and maybe not treat your family so well, depending on even if you were the same religion that they were. He would have been Lutheran because the Swedes were early converts to the Lutheran religion. But you know, he was the champion of the Protestant cause, but basically the Germans were not so happy. He was killed actually in a battle in Germany. They called him the Lion of the North. So he died relatively young. And the dynasty is called the Vasa dynasty. Okay. He was succeeded by his young daughter, Queen Christina, who was born in 1626. So she was just a child when he died, about 6 years old. And she abdicated in 1654. She's a very interesting character. They said she read a biography, or she was interested in the life of Queen Elizabeth I, and she sort of resolved that she would never marry because she figured that marrying would put her under the control of man. She sort of dressed as a man most of her life. Sweden was very Lutheran. After she abdicated, she converted to Catholicism, and she actually died in Rome. That's her abdication in 1654, right around the time that New Sweden was lost by Sweden. And then that's in St. Peter's Basilica. There's a monument to her. She's buried in the basilica, in the vault, but there's a big monument in the one aisle, as well as the Catholic stewards, the Steward Pretenders. So that's actually a picture that I took in 2012. I was like, Queen Christina, what's she doing here? So that was my picture that I took. There's actually a movie about Queen Christina with Greta Garbo playing Queen Christina from 1933. It's not necessarily very historically correct. They said Greta Garbo thought it was kind of a stupid story. It had that she fell in love with some little Spanish man, and she said Queen Christina would never have gone for some little Spanish man. And she just thought, I mean, I guess Greta Garbo's personality and everything, it didn't mesh with her too well. But sometime I need to check this film out. It sounds about half funny. Okay, so 1638, this is a print from 1702 from Sweden, showing the founding of New Sweden. Don't ask me what all those Indians are doing up there in the corner, but at any rate, that was the year that the colony was founded along the Delaware River. There is a replica of a ship that brought at least 4 loads of settlers to New Sweden. The ship is called the Kalmar Nickel, which means the key of Kalmar. Kalmar is a city in Sweden. And this ship was reconstructed in the late 1990s and is in Wilmington. And you can visit this ship, and I think they give rides. It's considered the tall ship of the state of Delaware. I think there's a documentary that was made about it. I don't know if any of you remember Cecilia Rush out at the Family History Center. She was fascinated by this ship. I remember her talking about it because she saw, I guess it was Maryland Public Television, it was the Wilmington station that she got about the reconstruction of the Kalmar nickel. But if you have Swedish ancestors that came to New Sweden, chances are they may have come on the Kalmar nickel. It was actually a Dutch-built ship. Now, the first governor of New Sweden, very interestingly, was a sort of a German, Walloonish Dutch guy, Peter Minuit. Is that name familiar to anyone? Because he also, there's an anniversary this year or something that he did, purchasing the island of Manhattan on behalf of the Dutch. Or they always said it was $20 worth of trinkets. I don't know what it was, but he had experience, but he fell out with the Dutch and went over to the Swedes and was really helped the Swedes establish New Sweden. And he was the first governor. However, it didn't last very long. The same year, he went to get supplies and stuff in the West Indies and down by St. Kitts. He got caught in a hurricane and died. I think the ship went down. So his governorship was short-lived, but he certainly was very helpful in the founding of the colony. Their first fort that they built was basically in the area of Wilmington and would have been something that looked like this block fort built with logs. There was a Dutch fort as well already in what is Newcastle, Delaware. They call that New Amstel. Also Cape May and Cape Henlopen and what's now Lewis, Delaware, those were Dutch settlements. Actually, Lewis, Delaware had kind of a strange name. It's called the Whorkill, and Whore means whore, but it's the same there. So luckily it got renamed. William Penn renamed that area Sussex County and called it Lewis. But the first settlers there were Dutch. This map is a little hard to see. It's from a historical atlas, but it's showing old middle colonies up along the Hudson. That would be the New Amsterdam, the Dutch colony. They made New Sweden a little bigger, sort of from Newcastle, Delaware, up to above Philadelphia on both sides of the Delaware River. And then that also shows Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia a little bit.
Sorry.
So loud. This map you can't see so well, but it shows, oops. It sort of makes it look like New Sweden is the whole Delaware Bay and all up and down the Delaware. And actually that is a picture of Queen Christina there, but you know, really it's sort of from about here to about there, because the Dutch were here, but they didn't have much in between. So you know, the Dutch, their main emphasis was on the Hudson River Valley and Manhattan. This is a map from Family Search, which is a lot easier to read. Shows all the different names and places. You can find this online pretty easily under their article they have on New Sweden, and shows you the modern states as far as the borders, you know, the Delaware border, and it shows the Dutch names, and also which are in yellow or gold, and then the Swedish ones which are in red. So it actually just shows from south of Philadelphia to about Newcastle. And the two big centers are probably what's now in Delaware County and what's in Newcastle County, Delaware. The river that's still named that, the Christina River, and that's named after Queen Christina. And I guess Wilmington, they were calling that Christina. What other names do we have here? New Amstel was the name of Newcastle, but that's not showing there. There's Tinicum Island. Well, there's a number of islands along here too. One of my ancestors was named Peter Larson Koch, and his island is right at the mouth of the Schuylkill River. Of course, they're also on the New Jersey side. Now, the one thing I learned in high school was the big contribution of New Sweden was the log cabin. And actually it's from the Finnish settlers. And this privately owned house called the Brahmin, what is it called? North Naval Log House. It's near Swedesboro in Gibbstown, Gloucester County, New Jersey. So kind of right across the Delaware Memorial Bridge in that area, if you're in that vicinity. They believe this house was built sometime between 1638 and 1643. And it's only the side that's closest to us that's the original cabin. And actually, they think it was a pretty large cabin for that time. Like I said, it's privately owned. There's a couple other really old cabins, but you know, the log cabin became sort of the quintessential American pioneer dwelling. And it was really the Finns that brought that to America. This is a memorial to New Sweden, which was erected in 1909 at Philadelphia City Hall. And it lists some of the governors and some of the main settlers. So, you know, right where Market and Broad Street, the City Hall sits right in the middle of the street there, close to the old Wanamaker building. And some of the settlers here that are named, Peter Koch, Anders Dalbo, Peter Lindstrom, Anders Bond, Peter Rambo, Olaf Stille, that's, I think, Keen is that name, Shoot, Kling, it just names a handful of them. The one thing about doing Swedish genealogies, they didn't really have surnames in Sweden, it was all patronymic. So you took, you know, Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. In Sweden, he was Per Gunnarsson. He was Peter, the son of Gunnar. And Peter Larsson Koch was Peter, the son of Lars. That's how they went. So every generation would change names unless you had the same name as your father. So when they came here and were dealing with the Dutch and then the English, they took on surnames. And I'll talk a little bit about what some of those surnames meant. But they created their own surnames unless they were of foreign extraction to begin with themselves and already had a surname. But the native Finns and Swedes, they just have these patronymics. It's really hard to tell who's a Finn and who's a Swede because the Finns were using, basically they sound like Swedish names, although they maybe didn't speak hardly a word of Swedish. This is another governor, and this governor is kind of controversial. Johan Bjornsson Prince. He was very authoritarian, and I guess initially things went pretty well, and he imported quite a few immigrants to the colony. And he was governor right up to 1653, about a year before they lost the colony. But things went really sour with the colonists. He had several of them executed. Some of the Finns ran away, and he hired some Indians. They ran away to Kent Island, which is where you cross the Bay Bridge. You're crossing to Kent Island. He had some of them murdered by Indians. He hired the Indians to just go knock these guys off. The Swedes that were there, they wrote a petition where they were saying their grievances, and I think got sent to Sweden, and he sort of knew his time was up because he was not allowing them to trade with the Indians. He wasn't allowing them to grow certain things. He was just really being a bully about things. I guess he weighed about 400 pounds. The Indians called him Big Belly. But he was not a nice man. He stole some Finns' property on Tinicum Island. He built a great big manor house there for himself, and he imprisoned the Finnish guy's wife. There's the petition in some of the books that I have, and he was really a lousy governor. Now it's kind of weird. Wikipedia sometimes changes, and the Wikipedia article on him is going on how great he is now. So I don't know what's going on with that. But I'll go with the original records, what they say, because the people that were there in the colony didn't really like him. So the gentleman that I showed to begin with, Peter Stebbins Craig, two works that he did were this. It's not really a census, it's more a tax list. So, you know, the Dutch had acquired New Sweden, and basically a bloodless transfer. The Dutch showed up and the Swedes said, sure, take us. And the Dutch were pretty good to the Swedes. You know, they didn't kill anyone. They let them do what they were basically self-governed. And then of course the English came in because the Dutch lost a war over in Europe, a naval war, and so the English acquired their colonial territories. And New Sweden became part of the colony of New York. So this list that was made in 1671 was for taxation purposes. So the New York authorities would know how to, who owned land here, who did we tax? And it's just basically a list of names. Mr. Craig went and added all the information he knew about the individuals that were on that list. So he really provided a lot more information, put meat on the bones. So then, of course, William Penn acquires the land. This is a very famous painting by Benjamin West, who was from Chester County, Pennsylvania, but lived from 1763 on in London. And he was a favorite painter of King George III of American Revolution fame. But in 1771, he painted this famous painting of William Penn making a treaty with the Lenape Indians. I have a print of this. It's a modern print, not color. This is the actual painting, what it looks like. And this might be in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. I'm thinking there's a copy there. I could be wrong about that. But I have a print that I've had in my office. I got it at Pennsbury Manor back in the late 1990s and got it framed up. And we had a paralegal firm I'm at now, CGA, who's a bit of a jokester. And she like put my face on the there's a squall there with a baby. And she put my face on the papoose there, and I was sitting with clients and trying not to break up laughing about it. The clients never looked at it. Not as bad as she did to my friend Judge Adams when he was leaving. I had another picture in my office, a farm scene, and she put his face on the horse's ass. So it was very unfair to him. But this of course shows William Penn. Okay, so this is an interesting case, and it says a lot about William Penn. Margaret Matson was a Finn, and some people have called her the Witch of Ridley Creek. Ridley Creek is in Delaware County, flows into the Delaware. In 1684, there was a trial. William Penn was the prosecutor and the judge in the trial. My ancestor was on the grand jury, Hunter Rambo. Not very good evidence. A lot of it had to do with, oh, she bewitched my cattle sort of thing. And, you know, someone felt sick or whatever. And she might have sort of been a creepy older woman that kind of, you know, came up upon people and they weren't real happy about it. So the end result was the jury came forth and they said that she had the common fame of a witch, but was not guilty in manner and form of what she was indicted. So this doesn't tell the whole story, probably. That supposedly William Penn said when he closed to the jury, she may fly around on the broom, but I know of no law that prohibits that. At any rate, this is about 9 years before Salem, where we had, what, 20 individuals or whatever who were executed for witchcraft. So this speaks so well about William Penn that, you know, this lady, they thought she was a witch. She's like, yeah, she has the fame of a witch, but we're not going to kill her or anything. They made her family post a bond that she would kind of mind her business and not freak out her neighbors. Actually, there are descendants of this lady in York County. Now, she was Finnish, and it even says, and these are the notes of the provincial council, which are published, and it even says they had to have a translator. Because if you look at the names of the grand jury and the petit jury, not too many of them are Swedish. So they had to have, by that time already, there were a lot of Quakers living there. And they had to have a translator because William Penn couldn't understand anything that she said, and probably what most of the witnesses, unless they were English. Now this is I like this map, but it's probably a little hard to see. This is from about 1687, after the Quakers had come. And if you can get close up to it, you would see some of the stuff right along the river. A lot of it along the Schuylkill and along the Delaware is Swedish owned. This little block here is Philadelphia. This is Chester County, there's Radnor Township, Haverford Township, the Welsh Tract. This was the German Township, I assume Germantown, different manors, Gilbert Manor, Letitia Penn's Manor, William Penn Jr.'s Manor. Interestingly, right by Philadelphia, there's something that's called Springettsbury Manor, which is not the same as our Springettsbury Manor here in York County. But that just shows how much there was such an influx of people right after William Penn acquired the colony. Okay, this is the main work, the 1693 census of the Swedes and the Delaware. This was created, it's basically a big long list of Swedish households and the number of people in them. So it had been quite a while since Sweden had ruled this area. The people in the list are asking the King of Sweden and the Archbishop and the Church of Sweden, the Lutheran Church, please send us ministers, please send us Bibles, please send us hymnals, please send us catechisms, so that we can have good Lutheran children and have Lutheran worship, because they were without clergy at this point in time. And this is a map of the upper area, showing New Jersey, Gloucester County, New Jersey, Burlington, Philadelphia County, which would be Montgomery County as well, Chester County, down to Marcus Hook and up to Neshaminy in Bucks County. And that, whoops. That shows Boone's Island, Peter Cox Island. So this is actually where Philadelphia International Airport is now. Every time I fly out of there, I always think about that's where one of my ancestors lived. There's a lot more marsh around it, I think, at the time. And then, of course, you have this big island here, Tinicum Island. That's sort of more where Chester is. Under the Swedes, they called Chester Upland, and there was actually a court at Upland that kind of administered the whole area. And they talk a lot about the creeks. You know, roads, they wouldn't have had many roads at that time when the Swedes were initially there. Their main thoroughfares would have been the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River and navigable parts of the creeks that flow into them. And this is like the oldest church building in Philadelphia now. It was outside of the city. These are Indian names. I've never heard them pronounced. And then if anyone knows better than me how they're pronounced, I know I had a distant relative from Ohio come and talked about someone lived at Codorus. I just looked at him and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was Codorus Township, which if you don't know how to pronounce it, Codorus Shore Codorus looks like that. And also I remember Barb Rudy talking about years ago, someone in the library said, oh, they lived in Cocalico. And she couldn't figure it out until it was Cocalico Township in Lancaster County. So I think it's Wicaco, I think. But the church now is called Gloria Dei, to the glory of God. It's sort of in South Philly a little bit, not too far from Rittenhouse Square, I believe. It's the oldest surviving brick building in Philadelphia. One of Betsy Ross's marriages took place there. At some point in the 18th century, it became an Anglican church. Church of England is now an Episcopal church. I know some of the early German settlers to Pennsylvania went to this church. They had their children baptized and so forth by a Lutheran minister, although they had some issues with not understanding Swedish very well. And I know Muhlenberg visited some of these churches as well. He was, the moving force in the Lutheran church in Pennsylvania. So that's the exterior. This is the old part, and these are other buildings. That is the interior, which is very interesting. And this building was built between 1698 and 1702. I'm sure it's changed some. I think there's some stained glass in it now. But it has some, this I think is a replica of the Kalmar nickel because it has a key on the back, the key of Kalmar. They've got this angel hanging there. This is obviously around Advent or Christmas. Looks like they have some tombs in the floor. Supposedly Peter Gunnarsson Rambo is buried there. I don't know if he's in the church or out of the church. This is very interesting. There was originally a church in Tinicum Island. These are supposed to be from Sweden from the 1640s, these cherubs. And were in the church at Tinicum Island until that closed, and then they moved it to, this is in the back of the church underneath the organ. And these two books that are open, one says the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. That's from the book of Isaiah. And the other one says, glory to God in the highest. So that would have been part of their worship experience. You don't think of a long church having that sort of thing, but that was something that was portable that they could have brought from Sweden, which at that time the artwork would have been pretty Baroque. This is Old Swedes Holy Trinity Church in Wilmington. Also about the same time it was built. This one's stone and not brick. And it's also an Anglican church. It's an Episcopal church now. Okay, we're going to talk about some of these actual characters. Usually at the beginning of lists happens to be my ancestor, Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. And at the time they were writing to Sweden, they didn't have many people who could write. So there was a guy, I'm going to talk about him thirdly, or Charles Springer. He had an education, he could write. He actually probably led worship services while they didn't have the pastor. And he wrote some letters for these people to Sweden. And you learn a lot about their lives through these letters. So I'm going to read some of Rambo's. It's kind of maybe a little hard to read it where it is there. But he wrote to his sister. His sister had written to him. She lived in Gothenburg. So he writes, highly honored dear sister, greetings in God Almighty. Your letter, dear sister, came into my hands here on the 23rd of May, dated Gothenburg, the 16th of November, 1692. From this letter, I understand about your temporal condition, that you are still alive, God be praised, which makes me, my wife, and my children glad at heart, that I might once again be permitted to hear of your condition and the fatherland, before it pleases God to call me from this world. Inasmuch as I have also understood from your letter that you now, and for some years past, have lost your eyesight and hearing, which comes as a great blow to me to hear, and that you write to me that I should support you with assistance in your poverty, which I should with all my heart do. But there is now such discord, war, and naval warfare that there would be great doubt whether you should receive it or not. I have already sent you money several times, but I understand from your letter that you received none of it. Therefore, I beg you, dear sister, to have patience until I can hear from you again, and safer conditions may be found for my letters and what I can send you. Now, what concerns my trade and conduct, and what my life has been here in this land, I have been in this country 54 years last March. When I had been here for 8 years, I entered into the state of holy matrimony with Britta Matsdaughter, who, God be praised, is still living. She also came from Sweden, from Vasa, which is actually in Finland, whom I have lived with in harmony and love for 46 years, and have had with her 4 daughters and 4 sons, but one daughter, when she was 8 years old, fell asleep in the Lord. And so I am still living 4 living sons and 3 living daughters. All are well provided for and live in plenty with their husbands, wives, and children, so that now from my lineage there are living 37 souls of my children's children. And I have served faithfully both the Swedish regime, the Holland Dutch, and now the English. I also sat at the court for 29 years, including both in the Swedes and the Hollanders' time. In regard to the Swedes, they, the Dutch, had a rule that no case should be decided at court unless the Swedes had their voice in it. And now I am old and can no longer endure the toil. Our nations also live faithfully with one another, both in harmony and affection. Our land is very splendid, fruitful land, so that we have no lack of anything on which the sustenance of our bodies and lives depends. For the nearby Caribbean islands are fed by us with the land's goods, with grain, flour, and beer. We have all cause also to thank God that we live in harmony, affection, and faithfulness with the Indians. while the surrounding lands and neighbors have had great distress from the Indians. I may truthfully say that God has wonderfully preserved and shielded us and has shown a peculiar grace towards us in this heathenish land. Nothing more occurs to me to write at this time, but my dear sister and children send greetings to you, my dear wife and children, and all good friends who may or can be found living, hoping for and awaiting your reply by the first ship that can come, commending you to the protection and care of God Almighty. But there's a lot in that letter. It's kind of funny where he said, I'm not sending you any money because I don't know if you're going to get it. Supposedly, when he first came, he worked as a laborer and he sent money to his father until he got married, which is interesting. So this is Gothenburg. So Rambo, where does a name like that come from? He didn't get it from the Sylvester Stallone movie. It's kind of the other way around. So there's a mountain called the Ramberget near Gothenburg, and it means the Ravens Mountain. So he took his name, his surname, from that mountain, because the little town that he's from is called Hisingen. That's where he came from, and it's right by that mountain. And there's pictures of it. It's right by Gothenburg and by the river that comes in there. It's a port city. And he also brought with him seeds for garden and for apples. And there is the winter Rambo apple is named for him. I've never had a winter Rambo apple. I'd like to get some sometime. But they were grown quite a lot in southeastern Pennsylvania and Delaware at one time. This is a copy of his last will and testament from 1694. He died a couple years later. I went to the Philadelphia City Archives to get this in the year 2000, maybe. I have a little bit of a story to tell. So I knew I had these Swedish ancestors. And at that time, the Register of Wills and the archives had their records underneath the train station in Philadelphia. Like, if you took the train from Lancaster to Philadelphia, there's that big train station that usually stops. And if you go to New York, it keeps going. So I had to go there. It was like underneath this weird place. And there was a young guy working there, and I pulled about 10 files. I was young. So he said, you pulled a lot of files today. I think you should pay me $10 for each file. I want $100. And I got very indignant about this. And I, from pocket, pulled out my wallet, got my bar card out. Like, I am an officer of the court. I'm a lawyer. These are public records. It's free access to this. You can't be doing this. And he got scared. He really did. He started talking to me about Philadelphia sports teams, and I could care less about Philadelphia sports teams. And then I asked for copies. We don't have a copier. They have to go to City Hall. And I thought, I'm never going to see these copies. But I did. I probably would have handled it a little differently. Now I probably laughed in his face and told him the same thing, but not quite as indignantly. So, but I was right. He probably should have been fired, but that's sort of how things operate in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and some of these places. You slide some $20 bills into the pages, then you make sure things get recorded and that sort of thing. I've heard horror stories. Thankfully, that doesn't happen here. But that's the original will of Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. Now, there is a signer of the Declaration of Independence who comes from these folks. John Morton of Ridley, Delaware County, Manchester County. He was the signer of the Declaration of Independence, died the next year, but he was on the initial committee to draft the Articles of Confederation, which of course were finalized here in York when Congress was in York. And he was the great-grandson of Finnish immigrants, Martin Martinsson. And I guess that Martin sounded like Morton or whatever, so that's how the surname became Morton. Of course, we have Yoakumtown in York County, which if Interstate 83 didn't exist, probably most of us wouldn't know the darn thing about Yoakumtown because it's a small unincorporated village. But they decided to name the exit after Yoakumtown on I-83. And it's named after the Joachim family, who were Swedish. Well, actually, they're not. They're from Schleswig-Holstein, which is sort of Danish. Peter Stebbins Craig, the author, that's the family that he descends from. It's the Joachim family, not necessarily from York County, more in the Philadelphia area. And Joachim Town is named for one of them. I think they came right around 1800 by way of Chester County, basically. Jonas Joachim is buried at the Joachim Town Church of God, and he was born in 1804. His father was Isaiah, who I think came out of Chester County. And that's off of Ancestry. I don't know how accurate it is, but that shows Jonas Joachim's ancestry. And so he's got quite a bit of Swedish there. You know, Joachim, does anyone know where that name comes from? That's the Virgin Mary's father. The Virgin Mary's father are Joachim, and their mother is Anna. So it's not in the text of the Old or New Testament, but traditionally those are the names. And you find that name throughout Europe. So someone who was named Joachim, and then Joachim's son became Joachim. Okay, now this is a satellite view of part of East Hopewell Township. And actually, my mother and Aunt Amy, they grew up right here. It's now an Amish farm. But you can see there is a creek called Rambo Run, which is a trout stream that flows into Muddy Creek. And if you look up Rambo Run on Google now, there's some dog breeder, it's called Rambo Run, and they have all kinds of things with that. But it's there's a fishing club or something along Rambo Run as well. But this is very close. Herschel Park, if you ever went to picnics down there, Rambo Run, Ron Hirschner's family farm, it runs right through there as well. And I think they sort of, the Wallace Cross Mill, that's on a branch of Rambo Run. And I think Rambo bought some land from the Wallaces, and that's how it got called Rambo Run. And he's buried at Round Hill Presbyterian Church, Aaron Rambo. So he's born in 1819 and died in 1892. And I don't think he really shows up until the 1860s in York County. But he has that creek named after him, so it was a place name. And that's his ancestry. And he actually has the same this is a common ancestor that I have with him, Gunnar Rambo, son of Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. And he has, now I can't click on it because this was a screenshot. This Brigitte, he has two Rambo lines here. So they were marrying each other. And his family came, I think they're in Chester County as well. They sort of moved up the Schuylkill, a lot of them, and settled. There was in Berks County, there was a St. Gabriel's Church, which became an Anglican church later on. That was a Swedish church originally. Okay, Peter Larson Kopp, I'm not going to read all this. He was dead already when this letter was written. But he talks about his father, what he did. The descendants, he was the cook on the ship he came over on. So he was, I think, a little bit more of a colorful character than Rambo. I think Rambo was, this is just my impression, I don't know. You see things through documents, really have no idea. It could have been the other way around. But he was a soldier and was imprisoned in Sweden for poaching deer on land of the Swedish crown. And I guess as a punishment was sent here. On the ship, he was a cook. And his surname, he took, it was the Swedish word for cook. A lot of the descendants go by the name COX. He had, supposedly his marriage was the first in New Sweden. He was married in 1643, had 7 sons and 6 daughters. A large family. He lived on the island right at where the Schuylkill goes into the Delaware. And another sort of interesting story, a sandwich that in Pennsylvania we usually call a hoagie. One of those islands that's right near there was Hog Island as well. And you had Italian workers that worked there. So they called those like Hog Island sandwiches or something, that it became the hoagie. He was on the court with Rambo. He was imprisoned briefly by Governor Prince. And but he was definitely another pretty much a leader in the colony. A lot of the Rambos married, 3 Rambo sons married Peter Larson Cox's daughters. However, there's a scandalous thing that happened between the youngest son of Rambo and the youngest daughter of Peter Larson Cox. On Christmas night, which year is it? I think 1684. Christmas night, 1684. Rambo's son lived basically in what was South Philadelphia now. He got in the boat and went to Peter Cox Island. And there was some kind of board on the side of the house, and he removed the board and went into the girl's bedchamber. And I guess he liked Brigitta and told the other girls, get out of the bed. And they had to sleep on the floor that night. She got pregnant. So there was a case brought against him. It actually went to trial. They were both found guilty of fornication, and he was ordered to marry her, which he did after a bit. And they had a big family. They moved to New Jersey, so that's they ended up there. But he was the youngest son, so it probably gave the families a lot of heartache. Well, not heartache, but it was just they didn't need it. And his brother Gunnar and his father had to post bond for him. Okay, this is the last guy that I'm going to talk about. I think we have some descendants here, at least one. He didn't come with the initial settlement of the colony. His name was Carl Christopherson Springer, or Charles Springer, or Carl Springer. He was very well educated. And he wrote the letters for Rambo and Koch. And he wrote the main letter, which was written to the church and government authorities in Sweden. His mother actually died the same year he wrote this letter, so I'm not sure if she ever really got it or she got it right before she died. She was the housekeeper to the Queen Mother of Sweden, and his father had been a court official. And actually, I think they had German ancestry, that had come from Germany. That's why he had a surname. So his letter, I'll read part of it. My highly esteemed dear mother, I cannot permit this opportunity, which thank God I now have, to go by without making known to you distinctly, dear mother, my present condition and life. First of all, I find it wholly deplorable to be so far away from my dear mother, brothers, family, and relatives, and in a land so distant from you and not able to receive any communication from you. For all that I have written to you many times without getting any answer, except for one letter in England. Further, I shall also let you know about my coming here to this land. When I was in London and was of a mind to journey home to Sweden, my native country, again, having gone to school there in London, learned their English speech and the writing and reading, and having become well versed in arithmetic, and as I say, was about to journey home, I was kidnapped, and against my will, taken aboard an English ship. And against my will, I was carried to America in the West Indies, to Virginia. And when I got there, I was sold off like a farm animal that is driven to market. Thus I was sold to labor and held in very slavery for 5 years together. My work was unspeakable. In the summer, it was extraordinary hot during the day, and my work was mostly in the winter, clearing land and cutting down the forest and making it ready for planting tobacco in the Indian grain corn in the summer. I had a very hard master, but now, to God be praise, honor, and glory, I have overcome it all. When I had faithfully served out my time, I heard accidentally that there were Swedes at Delaware River in Pennsylvania, which formerly under the Swedish rule was called New Sweden. And so, as I now tell you, I made that difficult journey of about 400 miles. And when I got there, I beheld the old Swedes and they received me very kindly. And then he goes on to tell that he had married and started a family, but he became a real lead. He had education. He could really help out and is an interesting character. Now, there's a family in southern York County years ago. I don't know if any of you remember Carolyn Gable. The Gables had the nursery, which was across from Taylor House. They introduced a lot of rhododendron and so forth into Pennsylvania. I think they also introduced multiflora rose or something, which every gardener hates, but that was by accident. She told me she descended from the Hersey family, which many people think is Hershey, but it's not. So the Hersey family was of French origin originally and were in Newcastle County and then lived in Bohemia Manor. They were associated with a religious group called the Labadists, which was very small, lived communally. That Slater name, that's one of the main leaders of that group. They worshiped every day, everything was communal. It basically sort of phased out. The Herseys then became, they owned the mill, the Labadist mill, and Francis Asbury stayed there. I think they became good Methodists. And then they ended up coming to Hopewell Township, York County. One of my grandmother's cousins was married to a Hersey, but they descend from Carl Springer. There was a Hannah Springer who was married to Solomon Hersey, and they have quite a few descendants in York County. I think Bridget said she descends. And how do you descend from?
Charles Springer, number 1, number 2, and number 3. And then his daughter Margaret, who married Benjamin Brittle. And my YDNA comes from me.
Oh, okay.
So I go back for 2 generations.
To Carl Springer.
Yes, well, to Cecilia Johnson, who was an immigrant from Sweden.
Okay. And last, well, let me see what I have. Oh, yes. That Ovid, mine is sort of a little convoluted. It's by way of Beaver County. So it's my great-great-great-grandfather, my mother's great-great, Aunt Amy's great-great-grandfather, Ovid Penny Reno, who was born in Rochester, Beaver County. He was the youngest son of this Charles Reno and Willie Ann Evans. The Evans family came from Chester County. The Renos were from Virginia and came to Western Pennsylvania at an early date. The Evans were actually Quakers, but Eli Evans' wife, in the history from out that way, it says that she was the grandniece of Lord North. Well, she's not the grandniece of Lord North, but her mother was the North. And I was probably over 20 years old when I discovered the Rambo connection, because I found research on the North family, and Roger North, who was born in County Westmeath, Ireland, he married Anne Rambo, who was from what's now Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Her father's Peter Rambo, son of Gunnar Rambo, son of Peter Gunnarsson Rambo. And there you have it. And that's everything. Any questions? Anyone else know that they descend from Swedes? You could, it's possible, if you have Pennsylvania ancestry, especially in eastern Pennsylvania, and you haven't plumbed the depths of all of it, you could run across these people. Because sometimes Gustafson became Justice, Johansson became Johnson. I mean, sometimes they can, Robeson became Robinson, and the names sometimes don't jump out at you as being Swedish.
That show up in your DNA test?
Not so much mine. My grandmother, yes, Swedish and Finnish.
I
So-
know somebody here had Swedish ancestors from that far back. Did that show up in?
It sort of depends what generation and how it all shakes out, but yeah, those tests, of course, with ancestry, they change all the time. I think at one time I did show Swedish, and now they're not saying it. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, and I brought some books along. If you want to take a look. If you think you might have some Swedish ancestry, I have the two main books by Peter Stebbins Craig. Also Rambo Genealogy and some ones about the churches, the early records.
Thank you for coming. The meeting stands adjourned.